I am Piers, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, the DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the projects, assets, and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I'm joined by Sam Harrison, head of ecosystem growth at Harmony. Harmony is a layer 1 protocol that has 2-second finality, transaction fees that are fractions of a penny, is EVM compatible, and in 2022 is focusing on radical social change through Web3 ownership. Sam, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And just as we dive in, I just want to make sure I put my mind in the frame of your audience. Most of the people that will be listening to this are really focused on decentralized finance. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, decentralized finance, and sort of like a lot of them are often people who are sort of like starting to build in crypto, so like questions around economic design, incentive design, like why you built a product a certain way, what problems you are seeing in the market, like those are all really helpful as well, and generally enjoyed a lot.
All right, perfect.
So let's dive in by like Harmony's been around for a while, right? I think you guys got started a while back, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Let's see, open staking started in 2019. Right. And then the actual mainnet went live in 2018. And so it's been a consistent progress of saying, okay, let's get this thing right. Okay, let's move on to the next. Let's get that thing right. Let's move on to the next thing. And so, yes, we've been around for a little while, but one of the things that happened at the very beginning of last year is, as you're aware, with a lot of DeFi protocols, with a lot of projects, they'll do an initial funding, and in that Genesis block, they'll lock up a whole bunch of tokens to be used for ecosystem development or developer development, whatever. And those tokens are locked for a number of years. At the very beginning of 2021 is when our ecosystem fund unlocked. And so we've been able to deploy that ecosystem fund now for the last year or so. And so that's one of the reasons why you've seen just phenomenal growth, phenomenal engagement. A lot of really amazing things have happened on Harmony since, the beginning of 2021.
And like, so back when you guys were creating Harmony, what was the problem that you saw that needed solving? That you sort of I suppose the protocol was initially created for.
Is it arrogant to say that we wanted to solve the trilemma? Like the classic, Vitalik Buterin security trilemma, where you can have decentralization, you can have security, and you can have scalability. Pick two, and that was, Stephen C. did not think that was a appropriate choice. He figured that the various different, the sharding technology that exists, the nature of decentralization, and the nature of the modern proof of stake networks and consensus protocols can allow you to have all three. And so when Stephen designed Harmony, he was able to create the first sharded proof of stake network that actually does all three of those components. It's decentralized, it's secure, and it is scalable.
Yeah, I still think that the trilemma exists. I think you just extend the edges of it. Like, our discussions on this always go around. Like there is inherently always some payoff or some compromise that you have to make. It's just how big you're able to scale to, and there are orders of magnitude. I mean, like, is a few thousand transactions per second enough? No, not even close. Right? Like the global financial system, or the analogy that I always come up with is, if the early days of the internet, if we were trying to measure what the expected bandwidth of the internet usage was going to be, based on the number of telephone calls that were happening, we'd never be even close, right?
Correct.
And so what we often say in this industry is we go, we need to do Visa, or it's 2,000 transactions per second, right. Or we need to, like, the new one is 65,000 transactions per second, which is Solana. But the global financial system is doing 2 million transactions per second at the moment, just ticking over. Like, Alipay on a good day does 750,000 transactions per second on the major sales. And in DeFi, one transaction isn't one transaction. A smart contract actually creates loads of transactions.
Correct.
So 2 million transactions per second replicates the global financial system as it stands, but you're probably looking at 10x or 100x on that. I mean, that's being conservative, but so 20 million, 200 million transactions per second is really what these, infrastructures need to do. So, when we say that we've solved the trilemma by extending out to a few thousand transactions per second, I'd say no, that's probably not true.
Well, so that's a good pushback, and I don't disagree with anything that you said. There are two areas that I think that, as far as solving the trilemma, we use to basically redefine the terms, and that's how you solve the trilemma.
I call that squirreling the argument.
You could also say it that way. But excuse me, cough. When it comes to decentralization, right, there is a massive difference between 6,000 nodes or so on Ethereum versus let's say 200, 300, 400 nodes, validator nodes on any proof of stake network. Those are different levels of magnitude of decentralization. And we're not at that level of decentralization. We think that the decentralization that we're at is secure, but it is not as secure as 6,000. When it comes to scalability, I remember a couple of years ago, 2018, 2017, people were talking about scalability, trying to get to thousands of transactions per second. And one blockchain came out and said, we have 40. Aren't we so awesome? Because Ethereum has 14 and Bitcoin has 7.
Right.
But the dirty secret was even that 40 transactions per second wasn't necessary yet, because the amount of load that we currently have on the system isn't the same as the global financial network.
Right.
So
not even close.
Yeah, not even close. Even if we have everybody in crypto all on one chain all at the same time, we're still not going to match it, right? So one of the things that Stephen did when he implemented Harmony, it's not just about saying, okay, it's solved now, but it's putting the building blocks in place that it can scale horizontally and in a decentralized way and maintaining security. So even though we say thousands of transactions per second right now, it's because our chain right now only has 4 shards spun up. Most transactions only happen on 1 shard right now, but each shard can carry 1,000 transactions per second. And the way in which the protocol is set up is it can scale horizontally. So as we reach every single second, we're hitting 4,000 transactions per second. Let's spin up another shard and another shard and another shard. And that level of scalability is what allows us to eventually say that we can solve that aspect. When it comes to the decentralization, I mean, Ethereum's the big boy in the room because they've been around the longest. We love Ethereum. Like, there's so much work that's been done there. There's so much creativity. But they have their own technical challenges. I mean, gas fees, everyone talks about how gas fees are just the bane of their existence, but they're required to manage the traffic flow. And so as we grow, that decentralization piece will reach closer and closer to being completely unstoppable. So that's how I'd respond to your pushback. Even though I may be squirreling the argument, I still think I think there's something there. And there's another, I don't know if this is underlining or overarching theme for Harmony, which is one piece is about the technology for sure, right? Stephen C. has a PhD in OCaml, which is a very esoteric functional programming language. So he's very interested in the technology. But interestingly enough, he's also incredibly interested, and this is really what drives him, the ability for blockchain and Web3 technology to help lift the financial well-being of everybody globally, right? And that's the mission. It's not necessarily, hey, let's build some cool science fair project. It's let's actually use this technology to improve the lives of 10 billion people. Our tagline for a while was consensus for 10 billion. Granted, there's only 7 billion of us right now on the planet, so Piers, get busy. But the other aspect of that is the fact that there's this consensus. It's not necessarily like a consensus algorithm. It's the fact that we are all coming together to agree on something, right? And that's what it is. Like getting the entire population of the world to all come together and agree on a single source of truth or something important or something viable and bring them all up together. That's kind of the overarching or maybe underlying goal of the Harmony blockchain.
So the opening line that we talked about Harmony was like 2022 focusing on radical social change through Web 3.0 ownership.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about like how does what Harmony is doing sort of facilitate that?
Sure. Where do you want me to start? Do you want me to start kind of the DeFi universe, or do you want me to start a little bit more on the DAO side?
I mean, just where you think the main radical social change is going to come from.
So I think it's most evident right now in how things are moving in the DAO space. And the reason I say that is because when you go in and you work in DAOs, you are breaking your mental model about what work actually is, right? Okay. It's no longer I show up from a 9 to 5, I do my timesheet. Somebody tells me the jobs I'm supposed to do, I do them, and then they hand me a paycheck and I go home, right? Mm-hmm. It's no longer that. The way that you need to work in is that you work in DAOs is you pick certain areas topics that you would be doing anyway because you love them, right? So for me, it's like, I'm going to be reading science fiction books anyway because I love science fiction books, right? So is there a DAO that I can participate in that talks about recommending new books, doing reviewing, like all the various different pieces of what science fiction is? Can I get paid to do that? And the answer is yes. Now, we haven't broken this open yet. Like there's a lot of stuff and a lot of things that we're kind of tripping over as we're implementing this new radical social change. But right. The idea is if you spin it forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in the future, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to be really excited because I know that my day is going to be filled with things I want to be doing. It's not like drudgery showing up to a cubicle farm. B, I know what I'm going to be doing is going to be funding me in one way or the other. I may not be ridiculously rich from a financial perspective, but I would be rich from a perspective of I am being fulfilled, right? I'm doing the things I want to do. And that's a social change.
Let's look, I don't actually always want to be a contrarian.
No, please. I love contrarians because it helps me flesh out my mind.
Like, why is this not just the argument for the gig economy? Like, why is this not just what already exists for Uber and Deliveroo and what the pitch was at the start of that, and like what the like pretty dystopian actuality it is,
right?
And like, why is this not Amazon Mechanical Turk for more complete brain work? Like,
it is, and that's the scary thing. It is exactly the same pitch. The difference is Uber sits in the middle as the middleman and captures all of the value that's created by all of their drivers and brings it just in-house to them. Right. Uber owns your data, it owns your rides, it owns all of that information. The drivers don't. Now, if you flip that on the head and said, okay, now the drivers do. Like there's not an Uber. Instead of Uber corporate, there's a smart contract that is doing the assigning of rides and handling all the payments and all that stuff.
Right.
That is the vision, where instead of having
you still have in crypto, you still always have, like, to be very like explicit, capital and labor.
Yes.
Right. And in GDP terms, in economic terms, you generally have this concept of the capital labor split. In a DAO, there isn't really any different from that. Like you have people who come in who buy the token because they think it's going to be valuable, and they are often the people who have the governance rights. And then you have the people who are often applying to do the work within the system. And like what you will often see in DAOs, at least what I've seen, is that the largest holders of capital often aren't the most engaged people in the DAO, right? And so, like, why would this decentralized autonomous organization, if there was a capital owning class that came in and wanted to buy and get a return, not end up charging the same fees that Uber does anyway? Because
that's an excellent question, and this is one of the places where I say we haven't cracked it open yet, because that model, people are using their historic social model and applying it to the new Web3 world. And this is why I'm saying that for 2022, Harmony really wants to break that and have radical social change, because there are a variety of tools that we can do in Web3 that can allow people who just want to deploy capital, be part of liquidity pools, farm their LP tokens, make their returns and their yields, all that stuff. That's great. But there's another part of Web3, and I'm saying this because I love your audience. But there's another part of Web3 that says, I want to show up to events. I want to show up to conferences. I want to build stuff. I want to code. I want to participate in these calls. And there's an entire movement called POAPs that people can receive as NFTs. I call them proof of active participation. I think that I don't think that's the actual acronym. I think it's proof of attendance protocol.
Right. So like if I actually went to the game, I get an NFT. If I actually went, right.
And now what
I get my CES badge every year. Right?
Exactly. But now what you start to do though is you start creating these reputational points that are associated now with your Web3 wallet, and then become your identity in Web3. And that becomes valuable in and of itself. So if I were to come into a new developer organization, but I have no developer credence at all, but I have a lot of money, I can put my money into the pot, but they may not listen to me around developer questions. They may listen to me about how to deploy capital, but they're not going to listen to me about whether or not Ruby on Rails is better than OCaml. Those are just two that I've heard. I don't know. I can't code worth a damn. I have two. Those are two programming languages, right? I'm pretty sure. I don't know. But the point is like, then I have my area of expertise, which is being a developer, is the thing that I am contributing to this organization.
Okay. So here's the other thing that I think is, again, not wanting to be contrarian, because I do want this future to emerge, and I think there's a lot of important things around DAOs. I think, I have this saying that I often say, which is that a country, a nation, a democratic nation is a DAO. We just don't call it as such. Like the entire leadership structure can be overturned by a vote of the people, and the money that the people, like there is a tax that goes into for the collective good, and then the voted people decide how the money is. Like it's a DAO. It's a DAO. Countries are DAOs, right?
Yeah.
So like we will be dealing at the size at the scale of nations in the next 50 years on top of these protocols. It may even redefine what it means to be a citizen. So like I do agree with all of that.
Yeah.
But from the point of view of a company, here's where I struggle with labor markets, right? Because Uber will pay $800,000 a year for a engineering manager or a chief product officer or something like that, right? And that person's value isn't just the work that they're able to create. It's the scale of the organization in which they create the work for, which means there isn't actually like a general unit of account for labor. The labor is valued differently depending on what the scalability of the product on the other side, the distribution of that product, the repeatability of that product, what their effect is in terms of revenue. And that is massively different for different companies. So what feels is likely to happen from just a like pure rational economic point of view is the great people in DAOs, centralized companies will come along and go, you are more valuable to us than you are in the DAO. Yeah. And so we'll just pay you more. And so the great talent will be sucked out because there are people whose unit economics makes way more sense. And you'll just have the less good people. And so it'll be the cheaper work that ends up in these collectives, unless you have people who are mission driven, which absolutely does occur and will occur. But that's why, the concept of nationhood or philanthropy makes sense to me for DAOs.
Right.
But for companies, unless you own a big stake in, unless it's something where it's a DeFi product protocol or something like that, which is generating revenue, it has that potential unit economics and you're getting the underlying tokens, that again makes sense. But for like science fiction work, which was the example that you gave, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't see how that actually ends up working. If it doesn't work in the Web 2 world, why would it work in the Web 3 world for that particular example? It's
a good question, and it's a good pushback, because what we're looking for is that force multiplier, right?
Okay.
That one individual that is worth $800,000 versus the rest who are worth 120 or whatever it is.
Right.
And it also sounds like you've been talking to Raid Guild, which is a DAO, which does a lot of developing in the Web3 space, but they have an incredibly difficult time retaining the talent because they'll be like a mercenary that will be hired to go and do a project, but then the developer who does the project then gets, hired by the company. And so now Raid Guild has to go out and find more talent. So yes, that definitely 100% happens.
I haven't even spoken to them, but fine.
Well, I mean, the fact is yes, it
Sorry,
happens.
Raid Guild.
And the thing is, it makes
I mean, kudos to them. They're clearly attracting great people.
Yes, yeah, and that's the thing. But there are two differences here. Number one is the idea that you alluded to that there are tokens inside DAOs or inside DeFi protocols, inside these organizations that enrich you for being part of the club, right? So that's one thing. That you can't necessarily discount. Another thing is the fact that how do I say this and still be nice? There's a lot of us who don't love our jobs, and it never has to do with the work that we actually do. It has to do with the TPS reports that we haven't filed yet, or it has to do with like all of these various different externalities. Like we have a shitty boss, or our commute sucks, or whatever it is, right? There are things that we hate about our jobs that if we could replicate our material compensation in a way that makes sense, we're willing to make that exchange because it's a better work-life balance. It's a better fulfillment of what it is I want to do. I can't tell you the number of developers that I've talked to, and developers and engineers and systems architects that say, no, my life, I enjoyed my job so much more when I was building. And now that I'm managing, I hate it, right? Because what they want to do is they want to build. And that's it. And so there's got to be a space for that. Now, do I think that DAOs are going to completely, in 2022, wipe the country and all corporations are going to become DAOs? No, of course not. But what I do see is that we're beginning this radical social change movement where we are giving you personal responsibility for what it is you do, how you get paid, and how you deploy your labor and your capital. Like, do you want to work for a DAO or do you want to work for Uber? Right? And you can make that decision because we're giving you all of the responsibility to do so. You own your identity, you own your contribution, you own your work, and you get to decide where that's going to go. And I think that is socially different.
Okay, so what is Harmony doing in 2022 to facilitate that happening?
So a couple of different things. We have a $300 million ecosystem development fund that we started deploying tail end of last year. In Q4, we deployed about $40 million. About $1 million of that went to DAO programs. And we are accelerating that. I actually just got off a call right before this call where it was my DAO operations team that we are radically accelerating the amount of funding that we're going out talking about and providing into these DAO ecosystems. And the idea isn't that we keep funding them to keep them moving, but we prime the pump. We put a little bit of money and effort into the setting up and providing the proper tooling for these organizations so that they have a path to sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Or if it's a DAO that's dedicated to a specific task that needs to happen, say an event, then they exist up until the point that the event happens. They do basically the tear down and wrap up after the event, and then they disappear, which is also totally how things should work. So we're putting money behind that. Right now, our DAO fund is at $50 million. We have roughly 30 DAOs that have been established on Harmony, and we're looking to, easily break through 100. Hopefully, Stephen, our founder, has very ambitious goals all the time. And so he said that I should be breaking through 1,000 DAOs this year in 2022, and then 10,000 by 2026. And that just made me start to sweat. So I'm like, that's ambitious. But so that's the idea.
It also feels like the wrong metric. Like, surely you'd want to be focusing on DAOs that are delivering value rather than just a pure number.
Well, so that's a good question, right? And from Stephen's perspective versus my perspective, you're absolutely correct. My perspective is every DAO that I set up needs to get to a point that it's self-sustaining. Like the people who are members of the DAOs, the people who are helping govern it, managing the multi-sig contract, managing the treasury, managing the tasks, they have to be productive. From Steven's perspective, one of the things that he does realize is if he doesn't push us, then we may end up getting settled over here and just doing minutia. Because of those 10,000 DAOs that he wants to set up, maybe only 1,000 of them end up being long-term viable. But we can't predict at this side of the playing field which 1,000 of those that'll be. So we need to spread our effort, our resources, our time and energy over 10,000 of them. And that's pretty standard venture capital investing theory, right? Like they'll go after 10,000 bets with the idea. Like, that's not true. That's not true.
No, not at all. Not at all. Like a venture capitalist definitely makes bets, but they make bets on team. Like it's team technology and product, right? But it's like they obviously they've got a number that they are aiming at, but like it's generally like 10 or less per partner. Per year.
Yeah.
In fact, 10 per partner would be big, like 5 per partner per year. And that partner will be dedicating their time to making sure that those things are successful. So, you know, for 10,000 pets, you need a large number of staff directly supporting to follow the same VC model. And the other, and I suppose this also comes into what's the ask from the fund? Like, how are you? Someone said and the reason I'm asking all these questions is because, you know, we think about similar things. You know, we will have an ecosystem fund and all that kind of stuff. But like the biggest mistake that was publicly made, and I think very few people have followed really up on, is how EOS deployed its capital. Like EOS raised
ridiculous amount of money, $4 billion,
billions of dollars. Yeah, I think it was $4 billion. And they spent $1 billion trying to build a developer ecosystem. And they also did the EOS funds, which they basically funded funds, and they funded lots of funds within lots of places and within lots of jurisdictions that then were feeder funds that then invested in crypto projects that had to have like an EOS bent. And, you know, corporate venture capital has a terrible track. Like venture capital full stop has a terrible IRR.
There you go. This is what I was waiting for you to get to, but go ahead.
But the next level down, corporate venture capital underperforms venture capital, which is in average an underperforming asset class. And then EOS basically just lost the money because everyone was coming to the EOS funds because they were giving out funds very easily and just like paper thin. They were like, oh, we're going to do this and give us money. And then they do the thing and then they leave. And like nothing sticky in the ecosystem, nothing stays. You have a sugar high, but you then have nothing remaining because the incentives were wrong.
Yep. So two things I want to follow up on with you. Number one is this idea about the internal rate of return, IRR, for venture capitalists, because you're 100% correct. The venture capitalists themselves, like my role, is to dig into the team, the product, and the technology, right? And the timing, really.
Sure.
And they dig into that and they try and figure out if it works, whether or not they should recommend it. The venture capital firm in general focuses on numbers a little bit more than actual things. And so they'll count, you know, what is their success rate? What is their internal rate of return? And my data is a little bit old, but when I was studying this probably about 10 years ago, the target for a venture capital firm was between 18 and 22%. I guess you shouldn't put an upper bound on your target for your internal rate of return, but that's about what they're looking at, right? About 19% or so. So looking at that numbers game and thinking about the 10,000 down to 1,000, okay, I'm getting a 90% fail, 10% succeed. All right, okay, so full stop there. Move that aside. So then let's talk a little bit about EOS and deployment of the funds. So this is one of the reasons why when we deploy our ecosystem funds, these aren't grants that we just give out and then walk away. We say, okay, you were awarded, our most common grant is a $50,000 grant. And we approve the fact that they have been awarded a grant, but that doesn't mean they get the money until they reach the milestones, right? And so their milestones are deployment of X number of users, like these it's specific based on the vertical and the product that they're making. but they have very specific deliverable metrics that then they'll get, 10,000, 25,000, 5,000, 10,000 of their approved grant because they're working and they show that the milestones were successful. I don't know whether or not EOS did that, but it's exactly your point. We want to make it easy to get approved for the grants, but we want to see work done for them to actually receive the money.
Mm-hmm. 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 That makes a lot of sense. So you guys have been deploying since last year.
We announced in July, we announced the 300 million ecosystem development fund. We spent probably about a month or two getting our tools and processes in place, but we really hit it hard in Q4 and deployed about $40 million in grants.
Right.
The difference between the approved versus what's actually been paid out, massively different.
Right. And what are you seeing? Like, what are you seeing as successes? Like, what are your favorite projects that are sort of building on Harmony as a result of that?
Yeah, as a result of the fund, that's a good question. There have been other projects that have come up. So DeFi Kingdoms is a great success story for Harmony. It's just kind of blowing up. It effectively is a DEX. So all of your audience people who are big into DeFi, you guys got to go check out DeFi Kingdoms. It's amazing. It's deployed on Harmony primarily, and they just deployed on Avalanche. And so you're getting some cross-chain arbitrage opportunities and places to make some more, make a little bit of that sweet cash.
That's sweet money.
Sweet money. But the idea, though, is they actually grew out of the fact that they did not come to us for any money at all. We actually went to them and say, hey, how can we help you guys go further? Because they had already seen the fact that the ecosystem fund was creating enough froth and activity that there are people paying attention and people willing to build and people willing to take a chance on something new. Mm-hmm. So while the ecosystem fund isn't directly correlated to the success of DeFi Kingdoms, I could see it being hard for DeFi Kingdoms to be successful without that ecosystem fund going. Let me follow up on see if I can pull out some actual successes. Because there are very few, because like I said, we pay out based on milestones. Right. Some of the things that we have done, we have a fantastic, how do I phrase this? As a white male, sometimes it's difficult for me to talk about this, but so we have like a HER DAO that's focusing on empowering women in Web3, but it's not just women, it's women and non-binaries. And it's basically anybody who's doesn't self-identify as a male. I think I have to go back and read. The point is like, let's help give a voice to those who have historically not had as big of a voice. We put $250,000 behind them in December. But we're also doing things like we have an ambassador DAO, and the ambassador DAO is setting up kind of local chapters all throughout the country and all throughout the world where people can come and learn more, meet in person if they feel safe, COVID, but also learn more about Harmony, learn more about Web3, how to come together as a community and how to grow together. It's another kind of a good success that's been happening. And they throw events, right? So we'll give them, every single event that they throw, we'll give them $1,000, $1,500 for pizza, beer, and t-shirts. So, because honestly, when you're on a college campus, that's really all you need. Right. But so those are two really good ones. Let me search my mind really fast. Sushi Swap coming over to Harmony was a product of the Ecosystem DAO, as was Curve and Aave. They both deployed thanks to the Ecosystem DAO. We talked about DeFi Kingdoms. Yeah, I can probably, if I pulled up my list, I could go through more. But those are the ones that come to mind off the top of my head.
It's really interesting. And like, as a percentage of the ones that have like got the grant, like how many of the, like what percentage are following through and hitting the milestones after the initial?
That is an excellent question. I'd have to take a look at our metrics to answer that, because it's not. It's one of the reasons why we allow our grants, these initial $50,000 launch grants. Yeah. We award them pretty easily because it's really a low risk for us. Because the number of people who get through all 5 metrics, I think there's only been 1, maybe 2 so far, of something on the order of 50 to 75 that we've actually deployed.
So interesting.
But yeah, because the thing is it takes time. You have to build, and a big component of this is actually building your community and getting your monthly average users up to a certain threshold.
Right, 100%. And like in the multi-chain universe, with Solana, Avalanche, Cosmos, Polkadot, etc. Like, how do you guys think about positioning yourselves, and like what's the harmony space in that?
So we like to consider ourselves the much like Cosmos, the kind of the hub for all chains. The idea is that if you are an Ethereum developer and you're trying to develop a product based on Solidity, you can come and you can deploy it on Harmony. And in deploying it on Harmony, you're in an EVM space, which not all of these other chains are fully EVM compatible.
Sure.
But you're in an EVM space, and so you can practice, you can get those users that are all in the EVM space already, and that is a massive, massive benefit. And then as you grow, you can start bridging to other chains, much like DeFi Kingdoms did. They were able to get $1 billion total value locked before they moved over to deploy their product on Avalanche. But when they did move over to deploy their product on Avalanche, we applauded them. I don't really drink, but I would have sent Frisky Fox and Dreamer a bottle of champagne for that.
Right.
Those are the two anonymous, kind of my main contacts there at DeFi Kingdoms. But that's kind of the point, right? We applaud when people go multi-chain. We like it. We're not trying to, kind of hold all the assets and all the value here on our chain. And that's why when we talk about, transaction costs and speed, like 2-second finality, we actually kind of internally, and this is a little bit look behind the curtains, we actually think we'll end up being a long-term place where everybody wants to work. Because when you experience 2-second finality, when you experience, like half of a penny of a transaction fee, and then you go over to Ethereum and it takes a lot longer and is way more expensive, you're like, why am I doing that? Why don't I just stay here at Harmony? But
for sure. But like Avalanche it's similar, right?
Yeah.
Like 2 seconds, 2-second finality. Like Radix is similar. Solana is similar. Like the sort of like finality and cost is certainly something that a lot of ledgers are competing on.
Sure.
And could you talk a little bit more about like what Harmony does specifically around multi-chain and like allowing people to bridge between, that sort of makes it interesting, I suppose, to start there and then bridge out
so we have a variety of bridges already up. We have Binance SmartChain, Ethereum. I think our Polkadot bridge is up. Our BTC, our Bitcoin bridge is either up already or should be up before the end of the month.
Nice.
Yeah. So we're excited about that, like being able to kind of lock up your Bitcoin and then use those assets in decentralized finance. That'd be great, right? It'd be really, really fun. And then let's see, who else is on our list? The idea, we have our engineering team has a long list of bridges that we're building so that we embrace that. Right. And that's actually one of the other things that I would say is that one of the big differences between Avalanche and Solana and all these other chains that are extremely fast and they have great technology and they have low fees and low, finality. We really put an emphasis, and it's hard to say we declare that our community and our culture is such, because that's not how that works. But we really believe that
project what you want into the world, and it will manifest.
Be the change. But what we really want to see is we like our community to be open. We like our community not to kind of shit on other communities. I do not think tribalism is a good thing. I think it's one of the worst things that we could possibly do is say, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, I'm an Ethereum maximalist. Like, I don't think Harmony should pull every single project that's out there in the crypto space and have it deployed uniquely on Harmony, right? You should, all of these things, they are fit for purpose for different specific things. As much as like I mocked OCaml a little bit earlier, I mean, Tezos is built in OCaml. Functional programming is a requirement for the automotive space and the aerospace industry. So if you ever want to do anything in automotive or in aerospace, you got to start with functional programming, which means you're probably going to end up building on Tezos. Give it what you will. But that's the point, right? So let's see, what else would I say about it? So that's what I would say, right? You would basically have a very strong community that is embracing the fact that there is a multi-chain universe and that we are going to go everywhere and everybody's going to come through us. And we're happy with that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective, because it is amazing how tribal the crypto universe is. I think that's been true about tech since tech began, like, Mac versus PC, sort of different builds of Linux.
Piers, are you old enough to remember the Mac, hello, I'm a Mac commercials?
Yes, I do. I do remember that. I do. Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember those too. We can share gray hairs.
It's really interesting because there was a very influential blog post that went out a while ago about this concept of evangelical. Was it evangelical dogmatic evangelicalism, which is basically this idea that when you look at different religions, the religions that over time, the religions that succeeded were the ones that were both dogmatic, i.e., our way is the right way and everyone else's way is not the right way, and evangelical, as in they go out and they try and bring people into the religion. Christianity being sort of and
I'll take you one step further, because this is where I grew up. I'm Mormon. I'm LDS.
Okay,
and you're speaking right my like evangelical. Yes, and let's get out there and proselytize all the time, right?
Right, and dogmatic, as in there is a correct way and your way is not correct. And then you look at like religions like paganism, and the general forms of it, like it being a very open religion, caused it to basically not win over time, because when you got a evangelical dogmatic person and someone who was willing to listen and change their opinion, then the evangelical dogmatic person was the person who generally won. And so like when paganism would absorb things from other religions, it would essentially be like when someone said the one true God is God, and God, and there are no other gods, would always win against someone being like, well, there's many gods and you can kind of choose whichever one you want and follow it in whatever way you want to. I don't know where I sit on this. I'm sort of saying these things because I think that piece came out. It was actually about Zcash, but I saw a change in how the Bitcoin community behaved, and I saw a change in how other communities behave to start kind of go, oh, we have to be dogmatic about this. But then you also see the wider world's reaction to this is actually is quite extreme. Like best comment I've seen so far, like when Mozilla was saying, "Oh, we're going to start looking at doing taking crypto donations," was they said crypto are planet incinerating Ponzi grifters. Was just
incinerating Ponzi grifters. This is one of the most impressive comments I think I've ever seen.
It's brilliant, and so it's very refreshing to come across a project like Harmony that is open, and I actually think that's going to be received very well by the wider world. I still don't know where I sit on the dogmatic evangelism versus like open. Like in many ways, the fun thing in being in a tribe is being in a tribe, and the ability to say us and them is what creates the group identity in the first place. You see that in everything, and like sometimes crypto feels like it's sports, right? There's the sports teams and there's the sports fans, and the sports fans like just being able to be like, well, that team's crap. What happened in 1998 and whatever. So yeah,
no, you're not wrong. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but there are a couple of different things. Number one, when I think about building out an ecosystem and when I think about building out a community, I definitely take some of the religious, frameworks in mind when I get the community behind me. Because honestly, Satoshi is our god and Vitalik is his prophet, right? Like, come on, let's think about it. Like we have very much a religious perspective. And being able to have people come together on a weekly basis and share the good word of Bitcoin and talk about all the things that we've done this week, like that's part of being part of this community. Now, what I will say is I do think that paganism has won. Like, you think Catholicism or Christianity has won? Ask me, when is Christ's birthday? And if you say December 25th, you're wrong.
I don't think, maybe, but like, was that just Christianity, like adapting itself to the anyway? This is
but that's my point, right? You end up having is the dogmatic approach. And I have seen this, kind of coming a little bit into my personal life. I have seen this in Mormonism, right? The dogmatic approach pushes people out and pushes the ideas out, which then come back in and change the what ends up happening with that community later on, and does so in a more insidious way. And I don't mean insidious as in a bad thing, but just a little bit more stealthy. Now, personally, what I think that we need to do in crypto is this technology is incredibly powerful. This technology requires a lot of personal responsibility. And it also requires people being able to communicate and talk and interact. And if we start saying, no, I'm not going to listen to you and talk to you because you're wearing a black t-shirt and I'm wearing a white t-shirt, that's not going to be how Web3 can change the world. That's not going to be how we can get to radical social change. And so we need to end the tribalism. There's a lot that Harmony can learn from Ethereum and from Bitcoin, and hopefully we can bring in those sources of truth.
May that be true.
Thank you.
Sam, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. We're going to have to wrap it up. I would love to talk to you again later on in the year, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Piers, I really appreciate it. Anytime. I'm sorry that it was a great conversation. I could sit here and talk with you for another 2 or 3 hours.
Well, we'll have to do it again, and I'm sure we can. I'd love to touch on some of these subjects again. So,
sounds like a plan.
Sam, thank you so much. And if people want to find out about Harmony, where do they go?
So the website, of course, is great. Is harmony.one, ONE. But then you can also join our forums at talk.harmony.one, TALK.harmony.one, and then at Harmony Protocol on the Twitters.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sam. Have a wonderful evening and speak to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Piers.